Hi everyone, we're just going to give it a couple of moments just to wait for people to join and then we'll get started. Okay, we'll get started now. Hi everybody and welcome to this Trustee Learning Programme session with Getting on Board. My name's Rosina and I'll be hosting today's session. Before I hand over to our trainer, Andrew, I'm going to just be going over some housekeeping bits. So you will get access to the recording and any slides used following the session. I'd like to kindly ask that you please stay muted on the call unless you're asked to unmute. This just helps to make sure that everybody can hear who is talking clearly. Closed captions are available and you will need to enable these from your end. The session content is specific to England and Wales, although many principles are applicable to Scotland and Northern Ireland too, so everybody is welcome. And you're welcome to use the chat to ask questions and share experiences. We'd really love to hear from you. And we'd just kindly like to ask that you please keep your comments respectful and useful. And finally, thank you to our sponsors, Rathbones, for supporting the Trustee Learning Programme. This allows us to make this session and the whole programme free to attend. And that's all of the housekeeping. So I'm going to hand over to Andrew now.
Great, thank you very much, Rosina. I will just share my slides. Hopefully everyone can see those fine. So a real pleasure to be with everyone today. Thank you so much for joining. And as Rosina says, there will be a copy of the slides available at the end. Just brief. This is when we need to make sure the click button down actually works. Oh, here we go. So just a word about me. I've been in the fundraising roles since 2005, when World Vision took a complete flyer on me, leaving my job in a retail bank to take up a senior role there, and I've been fundraising for virtually 20 years since then. The last 8 years as an independent consultant, working with a mix of charities, ranging from the large like Christian Aid right the way through to tiny charities. I'm a charity trustee of 3 charities, 2 of which have paid staff and 1 of which is an entirely volunteer-led organisation. So for those of you who don't have paid staff and are trying to raise money, I do understand what that's like. I've worked with charities of all sizes, and I provide pro bono support for some small charities when Cranfield Trust have asked me, and it's a great pleasure to be working with Getting on Board today. And if you want to have a look at my website, you've got the details there. So what we're going to do today, my mission is to help you feel more confident about 5 things. Firstly, aligning fundraising with your charity strategy. Secondly, giving you a bit of a flavour of knowing what you can raise and how long it will take to do it. Thirdly, explaining what some of the possible income streams are and what might work for you. And then moving on to the question about how do we develop a compelling narrative for funders and how can we build relationships with potential funders. So that's a lot to cover in an hour. I'm going to have we'll have two opportunities for Q&A, so we'll stop about halfway through to pick up any questions, and then hopefully have some time at the end as well. So if you've got any questions, just put them in the chat, and my colleagues will be just monitoring that, monitoring the chat box. So sometimes being a fundraiser can feel like you're walking on a bit of a tightrope, and you're walking along this tightrope between what is it that the organization is trying to achieve, what's its strategy, and how much you need to spend and over what time period, and at the same time you're obviously trying to think, have we got the resources to develop the fundraising to meet those needs. From an organizational perspective, I think you also want to know how much flex is there in the cost base, so that if you're not able to raise as much as you planned, you want to be sure that the outcomes of the organization are not going to be massively impacted. And if you've made some commitments in a document like a case for support, you want to feel fairly confident that you're going to be able to deliver them. You're also going to be wanting to align just how much reserves do we need, which is partly going to be back to the cost base, and you want to make sure that you've left some space for investing in fundraising. For example, it might be that you want to spend some money on a freelancer who can help you with your trust and foundation proposals, or it might be that you just need to spend a small sum of money getting your website up to scratch. But it's always the fact of the matter is you will have to invest something in your fundraising. Certainly if you're a charity of any size. So you do need to make sure that there is some space for fundraising. And I think sometimes there is a pitfall of everyone being so invested in the mission that there isn't space left to invest in fundraising. So that's just something to watch out for. First, I'm a keen gardener, and I'm growing my I'm getting everything ready for my allotment this year, and my celeriac seeds are just coming through, but it's going to be a long time before I'm harvesting celeriac on the allotment. And fundraising is not an instant results business. Fundraising does take time, and that's something for you to be aware of as a trustee, and it's something for you to be, especially if you're the fundraising champion, to be championing with your fellow trustees. And the other thing just to say is, it is tough out there. There are a lot of headwinds, and I think it's fair to say that fundraising in general is probably more challenging than it's been at any time since the 2008 recession, and probably even further back than that. There's obviously a lot of talk about the cost of living crisis. I think that is having an effect on individual giving programs and community fundraising, but you shouldn't get too sort of alarmed in a way by the cost of living crisis, because I think there is still money around there with philanthropically orientated people. I think probably a bigger issue is the fact that there is so much pressure on statutory funders at the moment. I mean, we've seen a number of local authorities filing for bankruptcy, and they're pretty much pulling the plug on all of the charities that they're funding. And so we're seeing a big domino effect of, as statutory funders pull back, everybody piling in to apply to trusts and foundations. And it's not unheard of for trusts and foundations to be getting 10 times as many applications as they were 18 months ago. So that is a definite headwind. But I want to be cup half full rather than cup half empty, and definitely to say that it is possible to grow the fundraising income for your charity if you've got a compelling case and you can express it simply enough. And we'll come back to that later on. So let's now just take a quick tour of the fundraising income streams, so we can think about how long does it take for certain income streams to bear fruit. And I've got my analogy here of the tortoise and the hare, and the tortoise in terms of fundraising streams is probably legacy fundraising. That's generally the fundraising stream that is going to take longest to come to fruition. I'll say a little bit more in a few minutes about where that's going to be shorter, but in general, I'd say, especially if you're starting a legacy program from early doors, then you need to be at least 5 years, and if you've got a very young donor base, a lot longer than that. I'm not sure there's any hair in the fundraising streams, but the nearest thing we get to it is probably trusts and foundations. But even there, you have to think about the frequency of trustee meetings and the time that is set between getting an application into the trustees and when they meet. So it's perfectly possible that it's going to take several months between you starting to think about writing an application and anything coming through. But I'd definitely say trust and foundations is a thing that you can probably get going quickest. If you are starting a major donor program from scratch, I would say you should allow at least 18 months before that program is going to bear fruition. Yes, you might get some gifts quicker than that, but what you don't want to do, and especially if you've got a paid fundraiser, is you don't want to set targets for a new program that are just impossible for a fundraiser to meet, because there's nothing more depressing for a well-motivated fundraiser than an impossible target. Generally speaking, anything that is relational is going to take longer, because we don't get married on a first date. So it will take time. And then just down at the bottom of the page, a comment on individual giving. So if you're running appeals, one-off appeals, they will come through quite quickly. But if you're starting to develop a regular giving program, and it will take, and especially if you're investing media resource to try and recruit new regular givers, it can take 2 to 3 years before your investment will pay back. So if you're in an organization where the focus is very much on this year's budget and income, then if you're going to make a serious investment in regular giving, it's not going to deliver for you inside a year. It just isn't. This next slide, I want to talk about some of the factors that will influence both how much you can raise and a little bit about how long it might take. So if I start over on the left-hand side, track record. This is important for trusts and foundations. So I'm going to give you an example now of a friend of mine who runs a charity that is doing a lot of work in the Gambia, and they've currently they've got some land and they're about to build a school on that land, and in total they're going to need £350,000. That's a lot of money because the turnover of the charity is about 35,000, and the trusts and foundations are just not going to give large sums of money to an organisation whose turnover is £35,000. They're going to be quite proportionate. So to get a grant for 10,000 is probably going to be a lot. And that means that my friend is needing to split down her school project into much smaller bits so that trusts and foundations can feel confident that each bit is going to actually get delivered, because nobody wants to fund something that's going to be half finished and is not going to deliver results. So your track record is important for trusts and foundations, and it's basically going to be a lot easier to raise money from trusts and foundations that you already have relationships with than new applications. Second factor is the size of your donor base. Obviously, if you've already got a donor base, if you've got 1,000 plus donors, then if you're getting a 10% response to a fundraising appeal, that's 100 gifts. But if you've only got 50 donors in total, then you're obviously just not going to make the same impact on a fundraising appeal. For some more mature organisations, the existing donor base becomes a source of major donors. So if you've got a tiny donor base, you're going to have to think differently about a major giving program. And similarly, for legacies, legators are going to have had some connection with your charity. So again, the size of the donor base is going to be a big impact on the scope for legacy fundraising. The age of the donor base obviously comes in big time on legacies. I've got clients where the average age of the donors is over 80, and legacy fundraising is going to be the big thing in the charity over the next 5 years. But you might be operating in a space where your donors are all maybe in their 30s and 40s, in which case it's going to be an awful long time before legacies come through. I think how long you've been going as a charity is also quite salient when it comes to legacies, because legacies are going to be given to organisations where people have really got a strong association. So, for example, I'm a trustee of a charity that we set up in 2006. We've only had a couple of legacies, and the reality is we've not really been going long enough for us to be the kind of total favourite charity, particularly for older people who might have other relationships. But in memoriam giving, it has been something that's been more possible for us. Your network is going to be important to anything that is at all relational, and I'm going to come on and unpack this a little bit more shortly. But linkage is a crucial issue for philanthropic giving. So really thinking, hard about your network is crucial. And then finally, investment spend is particularly important if you're trying to develop an individual giving program. So if you are needing to do a sort of marketing, you're needing to spend money on marketing to get out there and attract donations from people that you don't personally know, then you are going to need some investment spend. It's going to be most flexible if you can spend that money digitally, because it's a lot easier to dial up or dial down. Then this question about thinking about return on investment as compared to the length of time that income might come through. For charities that have been going for a while and are a little bit more mature, legacy fundraising is probably the highest return on investment that you can make, but it will take longer to come through. Whereas events and community fundraising tends to be lower return on investment, but you'll get the money a little bit quicker. Historically, trusts and foundations would have been seen as one of the higher return on investment fundraising streams, but I think there's a little bit of caution needed now, just given how competitive trusts and foundations are. So don't get carried away by kind of old benchmarks where people would tell you could raise get 8 times as much income from the spend that you make in trusts and foundations. I would say, especially if you're trying to get into it for the first time, the returns will be quite a bit lower than that. And then just to say, my RG just stands for regular giving, just in case anybody was wondering. Right, I now want to move on to just thinking about your choice of fundraising streams will be influenced by the assets that you've got. And I'm going to illustrate this with a charity that I did some work for a couple of years ago. They're called Trustlinks, and they work at the kind of intersection of mental health and ecology / community gardening. So they get money from NHS mental health trusts because they're doing such an obviously good therapeutic job in their community gardens, and that is one of their big assets because they've got funding relationships with the NHS, but that funding relationship is more than just a relationship. It is credibility for them to go out to other funders and say, this stuff works because the local NHS are actually willing to fund us. So the funding relationship provides credibility. Or if I was to pick another example, I'm a trustee of a Christian charity called BRF Ministries. We've got one trust and foundation where the person that runs the trust is a massive fan of the charity, and she herself is very well networked with other Christian trusts and foundations, and she's kind of our best salesperson. So she has introduced other trust and foundation relationships to the organization. And that kind of leads neatly into the topic of networks. So your existing funders, your supporters, your volunteers, and you yourselves as trustees are a vital part of the networks that you've got. And especially if you're thinking about things like community fundraising, your volunteers might become absolutely crucial. So again, just going back to Trustlinks, they've got volunteers who are offering time at the community gardens, but some of those volunteers are, are involved with the cricket club, or they're on the parent teachers association, or they're a member of the local Rotary or Lions club or whatever. And so they themselves have got networks that can help with community fundraising. And thinking about your assets just in terms of your existing community support. So have you got churches, mosques, schools, local businesses that are, especially if you're a local charity, do make something of your locality, and especially if you're in the kind of place where there's a certain civic pride in the place where you live, then do kind of leverage that for all that it's worth if you're working locally. So volunteers themselves, just in terms of what they do, are obviously an asset. So think about the volunteering experience that's on offer. Think about the skills and expertise you've got in your own trustee body, and think about if you're operating from sites, then just think about those. And I'm just going to quickly, so these are a couple of pictures from Trust Links. On the left hand side, you've got the community garden, which is like a fantastic place to invite people to just come and look round. There's nothing that's going to get a major donor more excited than actually to kind of come and see the place. And then on the right hand side, there's this container that has been donated to them. You perhaps can't see, but there's a little kind of bug garden on the top of the container. But it was a fantastic place in which a band can be operating for a community day, and really bringing a community day to life, for example. Telling stories of changed lives. Just do not underestimate how important that is to your charity fundraising. Again, just going back to Trust Links, I turned up to the community garden and I got chatting to a couple of people who were just delighted to tell me their story. And within 2 hours, I knew that I could, if somebody had asked me to, I'd got 2 fundraising appeals that I could write just straight off, because they were just absolutely unbelievably emotional stories of people whose lives have been changed by TrustLink. And then just a brief word on your location. And here I'm going to move to another organisation that I held, called the Upper Room. They're a homeless charity in West London, but their location in West London was absolutely crucial, because it turns out that they were relatively close to big BBC premises, and there were a lot of BBC personalities that actually lived in the vicinity of the organisation. And so, for example, they were able to have speakers of the quality of Jeremy Paxman and Claire Balding doing a speaking evening for them, which was a fantastic community fundraiser. So the basic message I want to get across is you've probably got more assets than you think, and really to just go through and do a bit of an inventory of your assets is a super worthwhile activity. After you've done that, you really need to think about where you're going to put the effort in. Obviously, you want to be trying to focus on either some quick wins where you know that there's a high impact and it's not masses of effort, or things that you know are going to take more effort, but there's a big prize at the end of it. And you definitely want to avoid the bottom right-hand box of things that are going to take lots of effort and actually are not going to give you much of a return. And I'd also say try and avoid the fill-in activity, because that's the stuff that just ends up consuming all your time, and then you haven't got the time to do the things that are really going to make an impact. This is a good point to take one or two questions, and then we'll go on to the second half, where we're going to look at compelling narratives and developing relationships. So Rosina or Fiona, do you want to just call out any questions that there are in the chat? Or if there aren't any already, now's your time just to fire off a few questions into the chat.
Yeah, I can see Fiona has actually added a question in the chat. Fiona, do you want to read it out?
Yeah, sure. It was when you were talking about the donor base, and I was wondering, when you're talking about donor base, are you just counting proven donors, as in people who've already given money, or are you also counting in prospective donors, like people who've indicated that they might give money in the future but haven't actually committed at that point?
I'm probably thinking about proven donors who've actually made a donation. So in my mind, I'm thinking of an organisation that does have a database, a CRM database of donors, and you can see how active those donors are. Clearly, if you've got people who've kind of put their hands up as prospects, then you want to be very obviously mindful of those as well. But I think in terms of just thinking about how much I'm likely to achieve on a fundraising appeal, it's going to be better to think about established, proven donors.
Yeah, okay, that's really helpful. Thank you. I'm just having a quick check to see if there's any other messages. There are no more questions, but Sam Dixon said this is the third time that they have heard you speak, and every time they're learning something new. So that's good to hear. And Helen has asked, could you flick back to the last slide?
Yeah, I'll do that.
I'll take a screenshot. And also, Helen, just to let you know that after this session, you will get recording and slides, links to a recording and slides sent to you when they're published.
Yeah, so this is just a kind of ease versus impact grid. I always like the story of somebody who was talking about putting, stones in a glass bowl, and if the glass bowl, you've already been putting lots of grit and gravel in the bowl, you discover there's not room for the two big stones. But if you put the two big stones in first, you can fit grit and gravel around them. And that's, I think, what you should be really trying to do. Make sure you're giving yourself enough time to do a couple of big things and not get so distracted by small stuff. And I think, especially if you're a kind of volunteer-led organisation, it's very easy to get lots of small stuff, and especially sometimes community fundraising can end up a bit like that, like especially if they're events that you're running. So I know how much effort it takes to run a little a Christmas charity ball at Streetlight, where I'm a trustee. I also know how much less effort it makes now that we've actually contracted out the venue and the cooking to somebody else. But it can suck out all your energy and then not give you enough space for other things. Right, so I'm going to then come on to the next part, which is about narrative. And I want to talk about something that in the jargon is called a case for support, which I suppose crudely is a why should I care and why should I give to the organisation. I think you do, even if you never produce a case for support and turn it into a nice little document with some photos that you've printed off, even if it's just something that's sitting on your laptop as trustees, I think you do need one as an organisation, and you need that narrative because it's going to give you this silver thread of key messaging that's going to inform your fundraising communication. So it's going to inform your fundraising appeals to individual givers. It's going to inform your legacy communications. If you're the kind of charity that can have a supporter magazine, it will inform the stories that go into that. If you're a community fundraising organisation, it's even the pictures that end up on the pop-up stand, or that's all part of the narrative. And if you're getting into philanthropic fundraising, so if you're getting major donors who are giving you large gifts, or if you're writing to trusts, you do need to have that. You do need to have that narrative thread, which you can either express as a general case for support where you're getting unrestricted money, or it could be that you've got a capital appeal. Maybe it's a new building that you're constructing, or a new program that you're setting up, and you want to raise money that's going to be restricted to that program. You can write a case for that specific program. Just a very brief word about a case for support is, as it says at the bottom of this slide, is written for outsiders. In other words, it's about your supporters and potential supporters, whereas a mission statement is often really for insiders. It's for the staff and the board to explain why we do what we do. A vision statement often ends up as quite an internal document. It's talking about the future and where you want to end up, but it's always written for insiders as well as outsiders. Whereas a case for support is only written with supporters in mind.
Hi, sorry, Mike, I'm just going to interrupt to ask, could everybody put themselves on mute? Sorry, Andrew, just ask people to put themselves on mute and stay on mute. Thank you. It helps everyone else hear clearly. Thank you.
Okay, so we got this case for support. It's definitely written for supporters. Want to just say, it's not, if you've written this document, it's not, you're not going to get instant results. It's not a silver bullet. And it's not designed really as a document where somebody's going to read it and instantaneously send you a check for £10,000. It is designed to prompt interest and a conversation. So in my mind, a case for support document, if it leads somebody to read it and think, I'm interested, I'd like to know more, then it's done its job. So it's a stepping stone across the river, and the journey to the other side of the river is the gift. If you're writing a case for support, you need to address 5 questions. The first one is why now? Essentially, there's got to be some urgency about this. People do not wake up in the morning thinking, I really must give money today, in the same way as they open the fridge and think, I really need to pop down to the supermarket. So you've got to have some urgency about it, and there's got to be a real genuine need there that you're addressing, a solution that you're offering. The second question is, why us? You've got to be able to demonstrate your credibility and what is unique or special about you. Why is our organisation the answer to this need, and can we show that we've either been doing it for a long time, or there are authoritative people that would say that we're doing an obviously good job. Third question, what will we achieve? What are going to be the outcomes when we've been successful? And I want to stress outcomes, not activities. So it's not about the immediate things you do, it's what will come out when you do the things that you do. Then how much do we need, and over what period of time, and for what? So you're being really quite specific about your shopping list. That's going to be particularly important if you've got a specific restricted capital appeal. So not quite so essential for a general appeal. And then the final and often neglected question is, why me? What is going to connect me as a prospective donor with your cause? So, and this is just so crucial. What is often we give because it affirms our identity. You know, if you love cats and dogs, you might give to the Dogs Trust or to the RSPCA because your identity is an animal lover. If you love gardening, you might give to the RHA because that, and especially if you're an older person who loves gardening, you might want your love of gardening to be left to future generations. So that's the connection that you've got to make. It might be that you're, again, coming back to local charities, you are making a big appeal to the fact that, you know, it's people's local sense of pride. It's appealing to that. This is the kind of people we are, you know, as Fiona was talking to me beforehand, in you know, Hackney or Haringey, you know, that might be some of the local identity that you want to be speaking into. Now I've got my beware here, even just in the way that you write. Beware of organisationally centric fundraising communications. Beware of things that make the donor feel like an ATM machine. And that often happens when you use a lot of we and us language. It's like you're basically saying, we're doing this amazing stuff, and really what we want is your cash. Now, at that point, as I say, the donor just feels like they're the ATM machine, whereas you want to be appealing to donors' hearts, and they've got to feel absolutely involved in this, and it is about them. Which is why my next visual illustration is my glue, because communications need to be about you. You is glue is the old saying in fundraising. And if you are writing just a piece of fundraising communication, literally, if you go through that piece of communication and just ring the number of we and us's in it and the number of yous, excluding asking you for money, then you will immediately see whether your communications is very organisationally centric. Then I want to just give you a few, these are all points really for, as the acrostic says, successful communication of any description, to be honest, but it's particularly true of successful fundraising communication. So we need our communication to be simple. It has got to have a short and sweet core message that you can get into your head very quickly. If you can be a bit unexpected, that is good. In other words, if you can engage and intrigue, or come up with something that wasn't quite what somebody or something that is counterintuitive, where people are thinking, oh, I've never thought about it like that before, that can be helpful. Super important that you make it concrete. So you really need to be able to feel, smell, and touch the idea, and doing individual case studies. So telling the story of your organization through an individual is really crucial. You want to be credible, so you want to use detail to support, and part of credibility in a case for support is obviously being able to draw on messengers who would basically be spokespeople for you. Totally crucially, you need to be emotional. People do not make a giving decision just based around reading something that is logical. Reason leads to conclusions, emotion leads to action. So if your fundraising materials are as dull as ditch water, that you might have a logically fantastic cause, but if there's no emotional hook, you're going to really struggle to raise money. And people remember stories, so use storytelling in what you write, and tell it simply and repeat it in a memorable way. So those are my tips. If you want an example of a case study, of a case for sport, there's an organisation that you can look up online called Lambourne End. They're an outbound centre and community farm in Essex, and I did some work with them last year where I ran a workshop on case for support with them. They then had to go out writing one. I gave a bit of a critique, and they've just launched their capital appeal, but they put their case for support rather bravely on their website, so you can go and read it. It's a really good effort. I mean, I could come back and say, I think it's still a little bit a bit more we and us than I would ideally like, but I think in it you will see some brilliant case studies. I would defy you not to be emotionally touched by the case studies, and they use language brilliantly. And I wrote down one quote. So this is a place where disadvantaged young people are really discovering the true them, and they write, "You can help hold their ladder to the sky, or prise open their oyster to discover a beautiful pearl." And I just think that's really nice, emotive language, and it explains what you can do as a donor. So Lambourne End Outdoor Centre, have a look on their website, and if you're feeling generous, chip in some money on the way. So then our final bit is about building relationships. So here I'm going to be talking about major donor fundraising and trust and foundations very quickly. So if you are trying to develop a major donor list from scratch, there are 3 things that you have to think about: linkage, interest, and ability. And if I was probably to put them in order, I would say interest, linkage, and ability. I'm sure there are a lot of fundraisers who feel like they wish they could have a £10 note for every time a trustee said, well, why don't we just write people on the Sunday Times rich list? Or Richard Branson, he's generous, isn't he? Why don't we, he lives in our village, why don't we write him? And the truth of the matter is, Richard Branson might well have lots of money, but if he's not interested in what you're all about, he's not going to give you any money. So the capacity or the ability to give is obviously a criteria, but it's not kind of the winning criteria. You do need people to be interested in your cause. You've got to make that connection with them. You've got to answer the why me question first. Then it's wonderfully helpful if you have a linkage, and this is where your network comes in. So if you're writing to a trust and foundation for the first time, ask the other trustees, does anybody among us know anybody who's a trustee of this trust and foundation, or the administrator, or have we got any second degree hook that we could draw upon to make a link with the organisation, because it's just going to help you. So a very brief word about network mapping. If you sit there in a trustee meeting and say, do any of us know any wealthy people? Everybody will just, eyes will glaze over, and everyone's instinctive reaction is, no, I don't. But ask a different question. Ask the question, who do you know who you think might be interested in what we're up to? And then try and break it down into elements of people's lives. So family and friends, school, people that you knew at school or at university. If you play on a sports team, people that are, on your sports team. If you're involved in a religious organization, who do you know at the church, the mosque, the synagogue, or whatever. If you're a parent, who do I know in terms of other parents at the school gate, or people that I've met? Just try and break it down into areas of life, and I think that can become more fruitful in terms of just trying to figure out people in the network. I just want to say a little bit about major donor relationships, and I've really got, if there is only 2 words that I can use to describe major donor fundraising, it is cultivate curiosity. In other words, so do not be on radio broadcast with a prospective donor. Instead, spend 80% of your time at a first meeting listening to them. Ask open questions. Ask the tell me more question when they've told you something. And do be open and willing to talk a little bit about yourself, almost as an act of reciprocation. So I can think of somebody who was raising money for a hospice. They were talking to a major donor whose partner had been cared for by the hospice. But the major donor fundraiser shared a bit about the fact that her own father had been in a hospice, and that just makes a connection and opens things up. Do connect at a deeper level. Often the largest gift that people make will be the 3rd or 4th gift. So find personalized ways of thanking them that they'd like. It can be just a handwritten card. It could just be a little video. Maybe you're in a schools program and you've just got, obviously, if you've sorted out all the safeguarding issues, a little video of the kids. or it might be a book that you know that they like because they've told you about something that they're particularly interested in. Introduce them to other people who've got similar motivations, because that will be beneficial to them. And never be afraid to pick up the phone. And finally, do not think about sort of getting. So there's a lot of talk about the ask in fundraising, and I really do not like this as a term, because I think it makes you immediately feel like you're picking somebody's pockets or asking them a favor. And in reality, you're making an offer to people to do something that is going to give them great joy. Now, and if it's not for them, then fine. So think about the offer, not the ask, and just stay curious as you're talking with donors. And then my final two slides are, if we're now moving on to trusts and foundations. So if you need to be finding trusts and foundations and you want to know where to go for research, there are some free resources like Funding Central and Charity Excellence that you can find on the web. Obviously, you can find out about particular trusts and foundations. Go and look at their records on the Charity Commission. That's website. That's not going to cost you anything. In terms of paid sources, probably people would say if you can afford funds online, it's probably the best source. But Directory of Grant Making Trusts and Invisible Grant Makers are also very good sources. And obviously there are specialist directories. So for example, I don't know whether there's anyone here who's here because they've got a church project and they're needing to raise money. But if that's you, there's something called Church Grants, and it's a brilliant database, and it's available for 49 quid a year. So that's when you've found them. Then what do I do next? Well, if a trust has got application criteria, read the criteria and then read them again, and then make sure that you actually are meeting their criteria. And if you're not, to be honest, with the way that grant making is going at the moment, it's simply not worth it's not worth the bother. Focus on the organizations where you do meet the criteria. If they've got an application form with questions, then make sure you answer the questions and kind of fulfill the instructions. Ring the organization to try and find out more. I know sometimes that's difficult to do, but if you can do it, it does work. And endeavor to stand out, because just meeting the criteria these days won't be enough. Most charitable trusts are going to be oversubscribed. So you've got to think about how you're going to stand out. And a group of charity trustees making decisions about who's going to get funded and who's not, they are emotional people themselves, and so making that emotional connection will be important. And if you get turned down, ask for feedback, find out about what you could have done differently, and take that learning into other applications you write. Always thank well, and do remember personal touches. So that could be a report back, again with a little video that you filmed on your mobile phone, it doesn't have to be all posh and well produced, just something that is authentic and personal and genuine. That's really all you're trying to do. Tell great stories when you report back, and don't be frightened to ask for introductions. And that's me done. There's a few sources of inspiration on the next page, but you can take that away. with you at your leisure. So any final questions? And just to reiterate, there's plenty of the slides will be available, and anybody can connect with me on LinkedIn or whatever. I hope that hasn't been. I know I've broken my own rule about being curious and listening by a sort of a long me talking and just imparting lots of information, but hopefully people have found it useful.
Yeah, Andrew, you don't quite have any questions in the chat, but you do have a lot of thank yous. Yeah, like people are saying it's been really useful, they've enjoyed the session. Yeah.
That is that's great. That's what we're all about, and that's why I'm so happy to do this session for getting on board, because they're doing an amazing job with trustees.
Just echoing that, thanks so much, Andrew. That was really, really interesting. I've got pages full of notes now to take back to my own charity and a community group actually that I also chair, which there's some really useful stuff there as well. So thank you. I did have one question, but I feel like we're out of time. So I'm going to echo, I think it's Rachel King is asking what's your LinkedIn name so that they can connect with you. So I might drop you with funny enough, my question was about LinkedIn, so I might drop you a question there, and perhaps that will be the subject for a future fundraising, how to leverage your LinkedIn.
That's a good conversation. Yeah, so just Andrew Barton, you just look Andrew Barton Consulting you'll find me for sure.
Brilliant. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Andrew. Oh, sorry, Fiona. Yeah, I was just going to say, before we let everybody go, there's just a few a bit of information that we'd like to give about how getting on board can help further. So I'm just going to share my screen. Yeah, so there's a few ways that getting on board can help you. You can check out our upcoming free trustee learning program sessions, which you can find on our Eventbrite page. You can download our free guides and resources, which you can find on our website. You can also catch up on the Festival of Trusteeship 2023 sessions on our YouTube channel, and you can also book your early bird weekly pass for the 2024 festival, which will be happening on the 4th to the 8th of November. You can also visit our website to read more about the intensive and bespoke support that we can provide. And finally, you can sign up to our newsletter to keep up to date with topical issues facing trustees and how we can support. So all of this information will be circulated in the follow-up email. Yeah, and that is the end of the session. So thank you, Andrew, again for delivering a fantastic session, and we'll let everybody go and enjoy the rest of their days.
Okay, thank you. Best of luck, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.